Good morning. Oh my gosh.
Good morning.
How come I can see better without my glasses on?
I can't. Everything is just a blur to me. I was telling Adrian I've got to stop on the way to court and get some new readers. I've lost 2 days in a row. Somebody found them yesterday, lost them again.
Well, I've lost a lunchbox, if that's possible, and Amos's glasses. So you're just preaching to the choir around here.
Oh no.
So you tell us what has been happening this week. I caught a glimpse last night and I was like, oh, am I going to have to go down this dark hole of Murdaugh trial this week?
I don't know what day is what day, but let's just start with yesterday. We'll start with the most recent witness, which was Marion Proctor, and she is Maggie's sister.
And we have never heard a word from her, ever.
No, they have not spoken out publicly. It was interesting during the break. John Marvin, Elk's brother, went over and spoke to her husband, Bart. So, obviously the family still has some connections. And
well, he might have just been doing that so it looked good.
Well, the jury wasn't in the room, so it doesn't matter if they look good to the rest of us. It really only matters if you look good to the jury.
Well, I meant look good to her family.
Well, that's true.
Anyway, because then you maybe are like, well, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Okay. But yes, keep going.
Well, but John Marvin is the personal representative for Maggie's estate. And they're not fighting that at all.
Right.
So she described a little bit of Maggie, which is kind of crazy because up until we heard from the housekeeper on Friday, and they both described Maggie as real laid back. She said no worries, and she was real sweet. And we just she hasn't been humanized before. So that was interesting to just kind of hear. And of course, your sister's going to say nice things about you. At least I hope my sisters would say nice things about me. But she spoke with her the day of the murders. And I guess Maggie she liked to stay out at Edisto, especially in the summertime. And I guess Alec had asked her to come home. His dad was going in the hospital, and she wasn't super keen on going, but she encouraged her to go, which have a lot of guilt. If she hadn't encouraged her to go back to Moselle that day, maybe her sister would still be alive.
And was that something, did they ask her, like, is that something he would normally do?
Yes. And they said, yeah, that was pretty normal. I guess Alec didn't be alone. So
right.
Something that was somewhat normal for him to ask her to come home.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you couldn't really make much of that. More of that, I was saying, it was the guilt, but it was kind of more of the aftermath of what she said. So she said, after the murders, he became more concerned with clearing Paul's name than he did with finding the killers of Maggie and Paul. And that was unusual to her.
And I heard her say that. What did she mean? Like, did she ever give any examples of that?
She just said that, he really said he wanted that Paul was not the driver of the boat. Maggie believed he wasn't the driver of the boat, and it was his intention to clear Paul's name. And she said, did he ever act? He just didn't act concerned. They were really all scared at this point. They didn't know if there was this vigilante out there to get the family. They were scared for Buster's safety. They were scared for Alex's safety. And he, in her opinion, didn't really act super concerned about. They brought back up on Cross. Do you know that he carried a gun with him? And, she said he always carried a gun in his car, but on Cross, they said he carried a gun on his person, and she was not aware of that. Yeah, I guess he typically carried a gun in his car, but the defense is saying that he carried a gun on his person after the murders of Maggie and Paul.
Oh, they were saying that.
Aware of that. They just asked that question. And they also asked about the state of the marriage, and really consistently everyone says that the marriage was good. Now, they did have this in-camera hearing about whether a few things can come in, and one of the things she did say is, like, back 15 years ago, I guess she had suspected some infidelity, and he was texting or somebody was messaging him. It was really unclear. But it was 15 years ago. The judge did not allow that in, but he did allow Alex's opioid addiction stuff to come in. And she did testify that for years, Maggie was concerned about Alex's pill usage. So, a lot of people have poo-pooed the drug addiction, but it does sound like maybe there's some validity to it.
Yeah, you're right. I think to me, the jump of pill addiction, pill use to that's where all the money went are two
Yeah,
different.
I think that's what's struggling. Like, you can't say that, you've got $9 million missing and maybe that's where you spent $9 million on drugs. But,
Yeah,
and
like
they
so I have
said,
a 92 Volvo and it's eating up my $9 million. I mean, it ain't.
and she said they had a nickname for Paul. He was Little Detective. So they called Paul Little Detective because Paul was kind of aware, I guess, of this pill usage, and he would go, find out if he was using pills.
Mm.
Also been interesting in the course throughout this trial is, Paul maybe wasn't really the person that he was portrayed out to be in this media. I mean, we have this video of him being really awful and terrible, spitting on his girlfriend while he was drunk. I kind of am starting to think maybe he just really was bad when he was drinking. We've all known those people, but
Yeah,
so kind of described as kind of sweet. I mean, she says, and of course it's her nephew, so she's going to say positive things, but he was really very sweet, and we've heard that, like, and again we've heard from his friends, and they're his friends, and they all kind of describe Paul as this real dependable guy. I mean, I think he was kind of hyperactive and he would lose things all the time, but maybe he also had a sweet side to him.
yeah, and I mean there are people that are. I know one of them very well. If somebody has way too much alcohol, that they almost become a different person.
I
Which,
think the case
which
with
those people should not consume alcohol. You
they
know.
really, I mean, I think that is the case. I mean, we've all known those people. You're like, you turn, they called him Timmy when he drank. I mean,
Right.
we all know those people that you're like, dude, I don't like
They're
you.
horrible. Right.
We just, so, I mean, I kind of believe that to be the case with Paul. And she did talk about both Maggie and Paul. We've heard this from other witnesses as well. Were kind of shunned in Hampton in the aftermath of the boating accident. Um, hear from the sister that I guess Maggie had wanted to move. They were looking at a house in the Hilton Head Bluffton area. She said, I think she went down there to look at it as well, but then Alec told her, it's not the right timing with the boating accident, but now we know they did not have the money to buy another house. Marion describes, she said they lived a comfortable life. She didn't want for anything, but not an extravagant life. But I don't know. I'm not so sure about that, because what we heard from the housekeeper, I mean, the housekeeper's going out to find Capri Suns. She's at a doctor's appointment. She's calling the housekeeper, oh, can you go prepare a meal for us? Most people don't have those kind of luxuries.
Yeah, that's more than comfortable. They
Yeah.
also took private planes places.
Right. I mean, it doesn't, and they had a beach house. They had sold the house at Hampton proper at the time of the murders. And they also but they had the Moselle property, which was worth millions of dollars, and a Edisto Beach house, which was worth, I guess, million-ish or maybe slightly under. I'm not really quite sure what the Edisto, but most people don't have a second property worth almost $1 million and a main
Right.
house, 3
Right.
million. That is not to me what the normal existence of most people is.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. And maybe that just becomes where when it's been your normal existence your whole life. And I say that from a place of somebody who has had a lot of things, material things in life, but I also recognize that it's
but you don't leave your dishes on the table in the afternoon because somebody's going to come and sweep them up and clean up.
right.
Leave the pots of food on the stove. I mean, maybe if you're super tired one night, but you're going to be cleaning that stuff up in the morning.
Right. It'll be waiting for me.
Right.
Can you give a quick spill of why the Murdaugh family is so out on a pedestal. Money just doesn't paint the whole picture.
You know, you've seen conflicting things about this. I mean, if you look at some of the law enforcement, a lot of the law enforcement, when they responded to this scene, they didn't even know who this family was, but they obviously were given some sort of special attention because in the night of the murders, the family was allowed to congregate back in the house. And, during the course of this hearing, you have a lot of questions about SLED's handling of the case. For example, the morning after the murders, you know, Blanca, the housekeeper, finds out. She goes over to Almeida, which is the parents' house, and talks to Alec. And they have, he says, "Hey, there's going to be people going over there. Can you go and kind of straighten up and make it like how Maggie would have wanted it?" So Eddie says, "Oh, and by the way, don't drive in the gate by where all the SLED officers in. Make sure you go in the other gate." And so she goes in, and she notices several things that she thinks are kind of off, like the the food that she had prepared for dinner the night before were in the pots in the fridge. Now, I didn't make a lot of this because there were a lot of people. I think they said there were like 15 or so people who were allowed into the house. Law partners, family members, people were coming in. So maybe someone said, "Hey, let me just put these pots in the fridge." Which there was a tweet where somebody said, "No woman ever put." It had to be a man who did that, because no woman ever just puts a metal pot of food in the fridge. They'll put it in some sort of other container.
I mean, that is dead on. Unless it is soup, I will sometimes let it cool off and put in the pot. But my husband is infamous for taking all the pots and pans and basically creating a refrigerator full of them.
Yeah. And she says that Maggie's pajamas were laid out, and her, along with underwear, and she apparently did not wear underwear to sleep. Blanca was actually, she sounded like Maggie was a neat, you always get, she's so rich that she was a terrible person to work with. Blanca actually seemed really close to Maggie. Blanca had had a stroke, and, she wasn't working for them for a period of time, and she'd see her around town, and they'd stop and they'd chat. And, but Maggie also did confide in Blanca about some concern she had for finances after the boating accident. They wanted all this money, and she said, I'd be willing to start over. We just don't have that kind of money. So she did express some concerns about finances. But then also Blanca testifies that the marriage was strong, that Maggie was Maggie was Alec's world. And we've heard that. We haven't, other than, which the jury didn't hear, other than this whole 15-year text thing, we haven't really heard anybody else said that they were aware of problems in the marriage. We've also heard from witness after witness that Alec and Paul's relationship was very close.
Well, and I think you can see that afternoon when they're running around. Go back to me for a minute. And Sheila just said, yeah, the Murdaughs had hunting thank you events for law enforcement, game wardens each year, so they were well known. That probably really did make a difference. I mean, my husband is a criminal attorney, and
no, they were, well, some of the responders, and obviously the big people knew who they were. I mean, Alec worked as a volunteer solicitor. Right. The Duffy Stone and his crew showed up. And I do feel like they were afforded privileges to go back into the house and stuff. But SLED also did not do their job. I mean, Blanca testifies that Alec at one point says, "Hey, they've released Maggie's car from the police impounding. Can you go pick up her car?" So she does, and she's cleaning out the car, and she finds Maggie's wedding ring. I mean, why is Blanca the person finding this wedding ring and not SLED? I mean, to me, that is insanity. Now, there's two questions about that. My biggest one is why Blanca's finding this stuff. And then secondly is, why wasn't Maggie wearing her wedding ring? Now, we have heard testimony earlier that she did go get a manicure that day. But, it seems reasonable that you would take off, but usually you're not going to just leave it in the car. Usually you leave it in a little bowl when you're getting your manicure. But
I'm stuck, though, on this whole, they were trying to act like Paul wasn't driving. I feel like I've never had any question in my mind that Paul was absolutely driving the boat.
I don't know. He's the only one who has been charged with that. think that it may have been a reasonable doubt thing, because in the depositions, when you read it, you see a lot of, Paul was drunk and he would go and confront his girlfriend. And at that time, Connor would take over the helm. They all, Paul was the only one charged about that. But that night, and I think it was probably, some attempt to confuse the situation when there was definitely not, I think there was an attempt to, Ella tells all the boaters, don't talk, don't talk. That's kind of good legal advice to anybody. But I mean, he had a vested interest of them not thinking that his son was driving. And in the statements from the boaters that night, they all basically say, I don't know who was driving. So I don't know if that would be enough to have gotten him off. Again, he was the only one charged. Nobody else was charged. But I do feel like legally there may have been enough doubt for him to get off.
Uh-huh. Well, yeah, I certainly think he was, when you listen to the interviews and what everybody's saying, you're like, okay, yes, you were definitely, we know who was driving and who was, anyway.
Well, I mean,
At
again,
the hospital, you're like,
say nothing about this but I'm just saying legally, I think that there may have been enough to create doubts.
Right. And interesting that he, and I always thought that thing about being scared was interesting too, because after they were killed, it didn't seem like they were out, by all accounts, out and about doing things. And the police said immediately, I guess the police had their own, or SLED had their own opinions, but no one's in danger,
Right. They thought, well, I've thought so much about that statement over the last year and a half. And I think what they may have meant, that they thought that it was a targeted hit, that it was not random. And so they weren't thinking, the neighbor, there wasn't some sort of mad, killer running around killing the people of Colleton County.
What? So there was a police car interview, but then there was kind of a new interview that came out yesterday, right?
Yeah, I have to go back. There've been a couple of interviews. We've heard that, but I think that interview, we've actually we see it for the first time. I think we heard it, but we see it.
Okay.
And again, I'm a little confused because I don't know if I'm coming or going. I think there's another interview that we're going to see, another video. And I think that may come out in closing arguments. And this morning we're
closed, because I was like, he said, I took their pulse, but I was thinking he ain't got a lick of blood on him.
He doesn't. I think widespread people think that the DNA evidence was extremely kind of convoluted and like confusing. I think actually the cross was probably the most successful, because on the cross they hammer in there was no blood found on him. Yes, if you're wearing the shirt, you think you check for pulses, you would have some sort of blood. And that is what they're saying. But they're also talking about this missing shirt. And so they really kind of haven't picked a lane about, did you have a change of clothes, or you didn't check for the pulse and you would have seen it. I mean, it is. I don't know the witness, the SLED officer. They kept talking about more probability it's this person versus this person, more but then on cross they hammer in, okay, they tested 74 spots for spatter on Alec's shirt, and they were all negative for human blood. And the shirt that he was wearing was actually like a fishing shirt from a fishing boat. And they said, well, could that have just been some sort of blood spatter, because they test for human blood? And the officer on cross admits to that. There also was this thing that under Maggie's fingernails there was an unknown male DNA. They couldn't totally exclude CB Rowe, who was a caretaker at the house, but they don't people, so internet went wild. CB Rowe, but it also specified, it was my understanding by what she said, that it was very unlikely that it was CB Rowe, but there is this unidentified male DNA under her fingernails, and we don't know who that is. But the officer said you could get that a million different ways.
Mhm.
I don't know if that was something. I mean, the jurors were really paying close attention. Is that something that is enough to create reasonable doubt in a juror's mind? I don't know.
Well, I look forward to hearing what's happening today and hope we'll hear from you.
Yeah, we should find out first thing. They're having a hearing this morning to determine if they're going to allow the roadside shooting stuff in. And
I sure as hell hope they do. I mean, that was nuts.
yeah, so they're gonna talk about that this morning. Both sides are gonna plead their case, and the judge is not bringing the jury back until 10:30, and then we'll know if the judge allows the roadside shooting. And I believe we're going to hear uh, an audio kind of confession that Alec makes about his involvement
Mm.
in this, because he basically told his lawyers, hey, yeah, there isn't this other person, it was me, I wanted to commit suicide, this whole story. And he confessed to SLED. So if they allow it in, we're going to hear from that. If they don't allow it in, I think we could hear from Cousin Eddie.
Cousin Eddie. Mm. Well, now I know what everybody's going to be.
Today, the state, I'm not totally sure, because we had some GM provided some additional information about Alex Tahoe, who was driving that night. The state says they're still on track to arrest today. I kind of think it may be tomorrow, and then the defense will start their case.
Okay, tune in later.
All right. Thank
Have
you
a safe trip.
All right. Bye.
Bye.